Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today in our latest edition of PARAC webinars, the liability in certain situations and dual membership. Today, our presenters are John Borek, our actuary, and Judith Corrigan, our general counsel. Just a couple of housekeeping things for you before we get started. In the GoToWebinar control panel, if you need to adjust your audio, you can click on the audio tab here, and it will show you a phone number if you're having trouble listening directly through your device. We do have the handout of today's presentation, which you can download now to your computer and just click on the handout tab. We will be taking questions at 2 points throughout the presentation, but you can write your questions and send them to us. Click on the questions tab in the control panel and write your questions, and then I will read them off at 2 breaks during the presentation. We will also, if you want to expand your panel and put us in full screen, click here. If you want to minimize it and multitask while you're listening to us, this is where you can toggle back and forth, either full screen or half a screen. If you need to raise your hand for any reason, click here and I will see that you've raised your hand and we'll try to assist you. And if you want to minimize the control panel so you can see more of the screen, just click here and it will minimize the control panel so that you don't see all of the tabs. If you have any issues during the presentation, you can write it in the questions tab. I am reading those throughout the presentation. If you're having issues and I'm not getting right back to you, feel free to call me. I'm in the office today, and that is my direct line. We are recording the session. This will be available on our website at a later date, so just keep that in mind. Any board members who are attending this live session will receive 3 educational credits, and Rose will update your Prosper account. You don't need to contact her, just check your account in about 1 week. And again, since we are recording this, board members will be available to will be able to watch this at a later date and gain credit. They just need to upload a training affidavit in Prosper. So without further ado, I will hand it over to John, who will start his portion of the presentation, liability in certain situations. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha. Good morning, everybody. So today, Judith and I will be giving a presentation on both liability in certain situations and dual membership. I will be presenting the liability portion and Judith will be doing the dual membership portion. Next slide, please. Okay, so with the liability portion, my plan is to present several different scenarios which will show which system, if any, is liable for the associated service, and also in some cases how much the board would pay. And in these examples, when we talk about how much a board would pay, we're not talking a dollar amount, but more a percentage amount or a number of years. On the dual membership side, Judith will be discussing the current state of the dual membership law and how the law itself has evolved since it was added into Chapter 32 by way of Section 7 of Chapter 21 of the Acts of 2009. Now, a couple of things for my portion of the presentation. When a city or town is mentioned, it should be understood that the city or town has a corresponding retirement system that falls under the provisions of Chapter 32. And unless otherwise stated, it's assumed that service was purchased and the proper amount of the buyback was paid. And before I begin, I do want to give some special thanks to a couple of our coworkers. First, I want to thank Felicia McGinnis. She's the Associate General Counsel here at PARAC. She did a lot of the research on these different cases that were used to develop a lot of these slides. And a special thanks to Karen McMahon, who's our graphic designer slash editor in the communications department. She puts together the PowerPoint presentation and these slides. So Judith and I give her the ideas, and Karen works her magic to come up with this final project. So thank you to Felicia and Karen. Next slide, please. So when we were coming up with the idea of what to present, the topics of liability and dual membership kind of go hand in hand because you can't have a liability issue if there's only one system that a person worked in. So a person has to work in multiple retirement systems for there really to be an issue of liability. And also, you can't have a dual member unless you work in more than one retirement system. So for the liability portion, the liability runs the gamut for very simple cases where someone works in one retirement system for a number of years and then takes another job in another retirement system before they retire. And it also includes people who have purchased additional service under different sections of Chapter 32, which include but not limited to sections 3.5, sections 4.1H, and 4.2C. The following scenarios are meant to illustrate the various ways that one system or another is liable for service under Chapter 32. Next slide, please. So to start, I'm going to work on a very easy case here. Let's prove the Pythagorean theorem. Oh, hold on. I was helping my niece the other day with her geometry homework, and this must have slipped in. But if anyone is interested, here is the proof of the Pythagorean theorem. Next slide, please. All kidding aside, scenario one, this is really an easy one. So Randy Griffith begins work in the town of Juneberry. He works his entire career in the town of Juneberry and retires upon attaining age 65. Who is liable for this service? So the first quiz, answer A, Aprilberry, answer B, Mayberry, answer C, Juneberry, or answer D, Julyberry. And we'll give people a few seconds to choose their answer.
Okay, you should all be done with this quiz by now, so I'm going to close it in 5 seconds. Thank you to all who have responded.
All right, so I'm very disappointed in the person who said Mayberry, although that is a very good answer. Because the person worked only in the one system, Juneberry, of course, Juneberry is liable for the service. So the correct answer is C, Juneberry. Next slide, please. So scenario two. Now, in this instance, Randy Griffith begins work as a call firefighter in the town of Juneberry. After 5 years, he becomes a full-time firefighter in the town of Juneberry. He retires from the town of Juneberry upon attaining age 65. So the first question we have is he allowed credit for the time he served as a call firefighter? And if so, who is liable for this service? Next slide. So the answers are A, yes, he is entitled to purchase this time, and Marchberry would be liable under Section 3.5. B, yes, and Mayberry would be on the hook for the liability under Section 4.1C. The answer C, yes, Juneberry under Section 4.2B. Or answer D, no, he's not allowed to purchase this time.
We started early with the quizzes in this presentation. Looks like we have a clear winner. I'm going to give it about 5 more seconds before I close the poll.
Okay, now before I give the answer, I do want to move on to the next slide.
Oop.
So this is a portion of section 42B, and under this particular passage, specifically the highlighted portion, a call firefighter is eligible for a maximum of 5 years of service under this section um, while he was on a respective list and eligible for assignment to duty subsequent to his appointment, and provided further that such service as a permanent, intermittent, or call firefighter shall be credited only if such permanent, intermittent, or call firefighter was later appointed as a permanent member of the fire department. So under section 42B, in order for a firefighter to qualify for the additional 5 years of service, it's conditioned upon the call firefighter becoming a full-time permanent member of the fire department where the call firefighter service was performed. So in this scenario, Randy Griffith served as a call firefighter in the town of Juneberry and subsequently became a permanent member of the fire department in Juneberry. So yes, the person is eligible to receive service for the call firefighter time, and the town of Juneberry would be liable for such service. So the answer to quiz question number 2 was also C. Now, before we move on to the next scenario, I'm pretty sure everyone has noticed that the answers to the first 2 quiz questions were C. So I was pretty lazy when I came up with the quiz questions. So that might be a hint as to what the answers for the next few questions might be.
Why are you giving out the answers, John?
So under scenario 3, Randy Griffith begins work as a call firefighter in the town of Juneberry. After 5 years, he becomes a full-time firefighter in the town of Juneberry. After 5 more years, he gets a job in the town of Fancy Gap. He transfers his membership over and he retires from Fancy Gap upon attaining age 65. So the questions we have is he allowed credit for the time he served as a call firefighter? And if so, who is liable for the service? And the answers we have are yes, he is allowed credit for the time served, and Mayberry would be liable under section 3.5. B, yes, Juneberry under section 4.2b. C, yes, Fancy Gap under section 4.2b, or the answer D, no, he is not allowed credit for the time served as a call firefighter.
Okay, I'll be closing the poll in about 5 seconds. If any last minute entries want to get their votes in.
Okay, so it looks like answer B is the winner in this particular poll. And yes, the reason I gave the answers, Natasha, a little earlier was I was trying to fool people. So in this scenario, yes, because Randy Griffith did become a permanent member in Juneberry where he served as a call firefighter, he is allowed the 5 years of service. So this is very similar to scenario 2, with the difference being in scenario 3, he happened to transfer his service to another system, where in scenario 2, he had not. Next slide, please. So scenario 4. So Randy Griffith begins working as a call firefighter in the town of Juneberry. After 5 years, he becomes a full-time firefighter in the town of Fancy Gap. The town of Juneberry accepted the local option provided in section 42B and a half. He retires from Fancy Gap upon attaining age 65. So now the question is he allowed credit for the time he served as a call firefighter? And if so, which retirement system would be liable for this service? So the possible answers are yes, and Juneberry would be under section 42B and a half. Answer B, yes, Fancy Gap under section 42B. C, yes, Fancy Gap under section 42B and a half. Or answer D, no, he is not allowed credit for the time served as a call firefighter.
You guys are getting faster. I'm going to close it off in about 5 seconds. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so it looks like answer A is the overwhelming favorite. Now, before I give the final answer, if we can go to the next slide, please. So as we had mentioned on a previous slide, under section 42B, a call firefighter is to be granted service upon becoming a permanent member of the fire department where they served their call time. That did not happen in this case, so we cannot use the provisions of section 42B. However, there is a local option provided for in section 42B and a half. And this particular section states that in any city, town, or fire district which accepts the provisions of this paragraph, service as a permanent, intermittent, or call firefighter shall be credited as full-time service as provided in paragraph B, except that such credit shall not be conditioned upon the appointment of said permanent, intermittent, call firefighter as a permanent member of the fire department. So this particular section here allows the person to receive credit for their call firefighter time. In order to receive the credit, the community where the member served as a call firefighter would need to accept the provisions of this particular section. And you'll notice in the first line, it says a city, town, or fire district. So it's the municipality or the fire district who would adopt this local option, not the retirement board. So the answer to quiz question number 4 is yes, the person is entitled to credible service, and Juneberry would be liable under this section 42B and a half. Next slide, please. Scenario 5. So we're almost done with our 42B, 42B and a half questions. Just a few more examples. So in scenario 5, we have Randy Griffith becomes a call firefighter in the town of Juneberry. After 5 years, he becomes a full-time firefighter in the town of Fancy Gap. In this example, the town of Juneberry did not accept the local option in section 42B and a half, but the town of Fancy Gap did. He retires from Fancy Gap upon attaining age 65. So now the question is he allowed credit for the time served as a call firefighter? And if so, who is liable for this service? Next slide, please. And so for this question, the 4 possible answers are yes, he's entitled to credit for the call firefighter time, and Juneberry is liable under section 42B and a half. Yes, Fancy Gap under section 42B. C, yes, Fancy Gap under 42B and a half. Or D, no, he's not entitled to this service. Sorry about that.
Okay, I'll be closing the poll out in about 5 seconds.
Okay, and this looks like it's a close one. Fancy Gap with 42B.5 is the slight winner, and no comes in a close second place. So under 42B.5, as we had mentioned on the previous slide, in order for service to be granted under 42B.5, the call firefighter time or the permanent firefighter time would need to be served in the community that accepted the local option. Since the call firefighter time was served in Juneberry and the person in Juneberry, did not accept the provisions of Section 42B.5 in this particular scenario, no, the member is not entitled to that time as a call firefighter. So the answer to question 5 is D. Okay, so we have scenario 6, and this question is similar to scenario 4 and 5. Where Randy Griffith begins work as a call firefighter in Juneberry. After 5 years, becomes a full-time firefighter in the town of Fancy Gap. However, in scenario 6, neither system accepts the local option in 42B.5. He retires from Fancy Gap upon attaining age 65. So the two questions we have is he allowed credit for the time he served as a call firefighter? And if so, who is liable for this service? And now the answers. We have A, yes, Juneberry under section 42B. B, yes, Fancy Gap under section 35. C, yes, Fancy Gap under section 42B. Or D, no.
Okay, it looks like most of you have voted, so I'm going to close the poll out in about 5 seconds.
Okay, and this one is kind of a trick question here. There are two possible answers, and I will explain in a second. Before I say what the two answers are, please move to the next slide. So on this slide, we have certain passages in section 3.5. The key parts of this particular section are highlighted. And basically it says if you're employed in a governmental unit or if you had rendered service in a governmental unit other than the one you are currently a member of or currently employed in, and if you had performed service that was temporary, provisional, or substitute in nature, and you were excluded from membership by the rules of the prior board, then you are allowed to purchase such service had the service been rendered in the governmental unit by which he is currently employed. So now based upon this passage, the two possible answers for scenario 6 are D, no, the person would not be eligible to purchase the time unless the service is found to be temporary, provisional, or substitute in nature. And if those conditions are met, then the person could buy the time back, and the town of Fancy Gap, where the member was presently employed, would be on the hook for the service. So the two answers for question 6 were D, no, and B, yes, Fancy Gap under section 3.5.
Okay, I think they get a pass on that one because they were only allowed to select one answer in the poll.
That's okay. And I'm still a little bit perturbed that us presenters aren't allowed to vote on these questions.
That wouldn't be fair.
Scenario 7, this I promise is the last example we have on section 42B and 42B and a half. So now under scenario 7, we have Mandy Griffith begins work as a reserve police officer in the town of Juneberry. After 5 years, she becomes a full-time police officer in the town of Fancy Gap. Both the towns of Juneberry and Fancy Gap accepted the local option provided for in 42B and a half. She retires from Fancy Gap upon attaining age 65. So the questions we have are, is she allowed credit for the time she served as a reserve police officer? And if so, who is liable for the service? This time we have 5 possible answers. So the answers are A, yes, Juneberry is liable under section 42B. B, yes, Juneberry is liable under section 42B and a half. C, yes, Fancy Gap is liable under section 42B. D, yes, Fancy Gap is liable under section 42B and a half. And E, no, she is not eligible for this time.
Okay, with each answer, everyone is getting faster and faster. So I'm going to give you 5 more seconds.
Okay, so it looks like, yes, Juneberry under section 42B and a half and Fancy Gap under 42B and a half are the winners. And then looks like in third place, we have a 3-way tie between answers A, C, and D. Before I give the actual answer, if we can move to the next slide, please. So here we have the provisions of section 42B again. Earlier in the examples we had, the member in question or the person in question performed service as a call firefighter. And the call firefighter time granted under section 42B was conditioned upon the person becoming a permanent member of the fire department where they served as a call firefighter. Section 42B and a half is a local option that says a person can get service for this time even if they don't become a permanent firefighter in the department where they served as a call firefighter. So the fact that both communities accepted 42B and a half is irrelevant to this example because the member in question served as a reserve police officer, not as a call firefighter. So we can narrow those 2 answers from our list. So under 42B, the person is allowed service under this time as long as they served as a reserve or permanent intermittent police officer. There's no condition that they become a permanent member in a fire department or a police department or anything like that. They just get the service. So the answer to quiz question number 7 is yes, the Mandy is entitled to service under for her time as a reserve police officer under 42B, and Fancy Gap would be liable for the service. So as I mentioned, that's the last slide we have on section 42B and 42B and a half. So now we'll look at some of the other sections that pose questions regarding liability. So in scenario 8, we have a situation where service can be purchased under section 41H. So in this example, Lee E. Roberts is a veteran who is eligible to purchase the service time under section 41H. He begins his career in the town of Allenville. While there, he begins to purchase his military service through way of payroll deductions. However, before the purchase is complete, he gets a new job in the town of Bryanville. Bryanville allows him to complete his service through payroll deduction, which he does. He eventually retires from Bryanville. So the question is who is liable for this military service time? And so the answers are A, Allenville, B, Bryanville, C, both Allenville and Bryanville, D, neither Allenville nor Bryanville, or E, the U.S. government.
Okay, the poll will be closing in about 5 seconds.
Okay, so looks like answers A, B, and C are the favorites. I wish the answer were E, but unfortunately in this case it is not. This scenario here is the basis of a court case involving the Belmont Retirement Board and the Wellesley Retirement Board. In this particular case was Belmont Retirement Board versus Perak Crab and the Wellesley Retirement Board. Superior Court Civil Action number 9-4676. The Superior Court upheld the decision of Crab, which overruled the decision of Dalla. As far as I know, the Superior Court was the last appeal, so the case is final. In this decision, Bryanville would be on the hook for the service. CRAD have determined that service under Section 401H is not granted until the purchase is completed. And since the service purchase was completed while this person was a member of the Bryanville retirement system, then Bryanville would be on the hook for this time. In the Belmont and Wellesley case, the person first started to work in Wellesley before they transferred over to the Belmont Retirement Board. The Wellesley Retirement Board had indicated that they would accept liability for the portion of time that the person had paid into their system for the military time. So in that Wellesley Crab case, if I understand the reading of the Superior Court decision, in that case, Wellesley was responsible for their portion and Belmont was responsible for the rest of the service. If there's a representative from Wellesley or Belmont, if that is not true, just please let us know. But I believe that was the final decision. So the key takeaway here is that under Section 401H, according to CRAB, the purchase is not credited until the service purchase is complete. So again, Bryanville, answer B, would be on the hook for this service. Next slide, please. So the next slide, we have Howie Cosello worked as a sports announcer with the town of Milo Public Schools for 10 years. He never became a member of the Milo retirement system because he did not work enough hours to qualify for membership. He later gets a full-time job in the town of Ladyville and joins the Ladyville retirement system. He would like to purchase service for the time when he worked in Milo. Milo denied the request because he was never eligible for membership. Ladyville told Howie that, well, since Milo's not accepting the service, neither will we. So the questions we have are, can he make the purchase? And if so, who would be liable for the service? Next slide. So it looks like we skipped over me reading the questions, but you can see them there, A, B, C, D, or E.
Sorry about that, I moved too fast.
That's okay.
Okay, about 5 more seconds, folks.
Okay, so it looks like answer D and answer B were the two favorites. So this particular scenario is similar to the case Stephen Jakes versus the Mass Turnpike Retirement Board, CR-01-1094. And this particular decision said the fact that Milo refused to accept liability is irrelevant to the case. Pursuant to Section 3.5, as we had seen earlier, if the nature of the job is provisional, temporary, or substitute in nature, then the person is allowed to purchase the time, and the current retirement board would be liable for the service. So in this particular case, the person was working in Ladyville when they requested to purchase the service. So the answer is B. Yes, they can purchase the service, and Ladyville is liable for this time under Section 3.5. Next slide, please. Okay, scenario 10. We have Junior Sawyer worked part-time over a 2-month period in 1987 for the city of Granger as an arborist. I guess you could say he knows a thing or two about chainsaws. At the time, the city of Granger did not allow part-time workers into their retirement system. In 1989, a few years after he worked as an arborist, the city changed its regulations to now allow part-time workers into the system. In 1990, he took another job in the city of Granger, this time in the meatpacking plant. Before he retired, he sought to purchase this time from when he worked as an arborist. So the questions we have is, can he purchase this time? And if so, who is liable for this time? So the possible answers are A, no, he cannot purchase this time. B, yes, Granger under Section 42C. C, yes, Granger under Section 3.5. Or D, yes, Pomfrey under Section 42C.
Okay, we're closing the poll in about 5 seconds.
Okay, so now in this one, answers B and C look to be the favorites. So before I give the final answer, if we can move to the next slide, please. Okay, so here we have the provisions of Section 42C. 42C is similar to Section 3.5, except 3.5 allows a member to purchase time when they worked in a different governmental unit than where they are currently working. Where Section 42C allows a person to purchase service if they're working in the same governmental unit where the part-time, seasonal, provisional, intermittent, there's a laundry list of items there. So under Section 42C, because the town of Granger does allow part-time people to get credit for the service, this person is allowed to purchase their time under Section 42C, and Granger would be on the hook for the service. Now, if we go back to the question for a second, you may be wondering where the town of Pomfrey came into this question. When I had originally drafted scenario 10, the person took a second job in the town of Pomfrey. And as I was reviewing the slides, I said, wow, scenario 10 is exactly the same as scenario 9. So I had to change it up a little bit, and I just didn't bother to change the last answer in the quiz for scenario 10. If we can jump to scenario 11, please. So now under this scenario, Mick Sacco got a job as a counselor in a health connector that services dozens of communities. Each community within that health connector has its own individual retirement system. And there's also a separate retirement system that covers the employees of the health connector, conveniently enough, the HC system. The health connector is housed in the town of Huge, the largest of the communities. So Mr. Sacco was erroneously enrolled in the Huge retirement system. 3 years later, the HC system requested a transfer of Mr. Sacco's retirement contributions, saying that he was erroneously enrolled in the Huge retirement system and should have been a member of the HC system. So Huge obliged. After Mr. Sacco retired, the HC system asked the Huge system to accept liability for the 3 years when Mr. Sacco contributed to that system. The town of Huge retirement system refused. So the question is, who is liable for those 3 years? Answer A, Huge, because Mr. Sacco contributed to the system and they received the benefit of those contributions for the 3 years. B, the HC system, because he always should have been a member of the HC system. Or C, the US government, and why not?
Closing in 5 seconds.
Okay, and looks like there's a pretty even split between answers A and B, with answer A, the Huge retirement system, being the slight favorite. In this case, the answer is A, the Huge retirement system. This scenario is similar to the case of Mass Teachers Retirement Board versus the Haverhill Retirement Board, CR-06-0051. In that case, the member was erroneously enrolled in the Haverhill retirement system when they should have been enrolled in the teachers' retirement system. The member was properly transferred over to the teachers' retirement system, and CRAB had ruled that the individual was a member of the Haverhill retirement system, erroneous or not. So Haverhill would be on the hook for the liability. So the answer to question 11 is A, the Huge retirement system. Next slide, please. So in scenario 12, we have Luke Beta worked 10 hours per week for the town of Hoth during 2003 and 2004. This is well below the 20 hours needed for membership in the Hoth retirement system. In 2005, his hours were increased to 25 hours per week. At that time, he did become a member of the Hoth retirement system. He left that job in 2010 and took a job in Dagobah and joined the Dagobah system. While a member in Dagobah, he sought to purchase his time from 2003 and 2004. He argued that Hoth had never informed him when he became a member in 2005 that he could possibly purchase that time. Darth Vader, completely unrelated of course, the chair of the Hoth Retirement Board, listened attentively as Luke made his impassioned plea. When Luke finished, Dark spoke in a somewhat mechanical tone that sounded unsurprisingly a lot like James Earl Jones. I find your lack of faith disturbing. However, we refuse to accept liability because you are not eligible for membership at that time. So the question we have is Hoth liable for that service? Now, we don't let you choose. There's no quiz question associated with this. It's either yes or no. And the answer in this case is no. There was a case that was decided in Dala. The case was James Hartnett versus Bristol County Retirement Board, and the case was CR-02-624. And what they found is Hoth is not liable for the service prior to when he became a member, as he was not wrongfully excluded from membership at that time during 2003 and 2004. Dollar also found that there is no requirement that Hoth must notify, or in this case, there is no requirement that the retirement system notify the member of the possible right to purchase the time. Now, the case was silent on this issue, but based on what we've talked about before, I believe if the Dagobah system finds that the nature of the work Luke did in 2003 and 2004 was seasonal, provisional, or substitute, whatever the conditions were in Section 3.5, then he could purchase the time from 2003 and 2004, but Dagobah would be on the hook for the time. So the answer to this is, regardless of whether he can purchase the time or not, Hoth would not be liable for that service. Okay, the next scenario, this one's a little long one. This one's actually going to go on the 2 slides here. So we have K.K. Bundy worked in the small town of Woodbury for 30 years as the town gatekeeper. It's a very important role because there's only one road in and one road out. And KK was allowed to determine who could enter and who could not enter the town. The job didn't pay very well, but KK loved the power and prestige of the position. As retirement was quickly approaching, he realized that his pension from the town of Woodbury wouldn't be able to sustain the lifestyle he was hoping to live. KK was a smart man and knew there was a loophole in Chapter 32. Now, unfortunately, that loophole has since been closed, and we'll discuss that in a minute, where if he could get a high-paying job for exactly 3 years, he could combine all of his service and use the average salary from the end of his career and receive a substantial benefit. So he phoned his cousin Al, who worked in the affluent town of Stamford, to see if he could help him out. Al got him a nice, no heavy lifting job as the wrestling champion of the world at the, as the wrestling champion at the world famous Sportatorium. KK wrestled as champion for exactly 3 years, surprise, surprise, and then retired. Next slide, please. Upon retirement, the town of Woodbury was assigned 91% of his benefit, and the 91% was determined as he worked 30 years in Woodbury and had 33 years of total service. 30 over 33 is 91%. Whereas Stanford was assigned only 9% of the benefit, the 3 years worked in Stanford over the 33 total years. The town of Woodbury appealed the determination to the Pension Oversight Board, arguing that 91% was way too high based on the small pay that KK had received during the entire time he worked in Woodbury. The Oversight Board did redetermine the allocation between Woodbury and Stanford and decided that Woodbury would be on the hook for 4% of the benefit and Stanford would be on the hook for 96% of the benefit now. Now, Stanford was unhappy with this decision, so they appealed, arguing that the 96 was way too high based on only the 3 years of service. So the question is which system should pay the larger share of the benefit? And there's no quiz question here either, so this case is very similar to the Massport Retirement Board versus PERAC case, CR-99-083. And this case is quite interesting, where Dowla initially decided with Massport, where they argued the 96% was too high. And then Crabb sided with PERAC, and I believe the case was appealed a few more times, and PERAC was victorious in all further appeals. Essentially, what the decision is that the actuary is allowed to redetermine the the split under section 38C, and the actuary did and came up with the 4% and the 96%. So as fair or unfair as that may be, the 96% charge to Stanford was the final decision. So in this case here, Stanford would be on the hook for the larger share of the benefit. Next slide, please. And this is my last scenario. After the scenario, we will open the floor up to questions before we hand off to Judith for the dual membership piece. So now under scenario 14, we have Susan Smith worked for the town of Greenville for 10 years. She left to take a job in the town of Sleepyville and transferred her membership. She retired from Sleepyville. However, due to oversight, the town of Sleepyville did not send a request to Greenville to reimburse them for its share of Susan's retirement allowance until she had been retired for 12 years. So Susan had been retired for 12 years before a request for reimbursement was made to Greenville. The town of Greenville refused to pay a retroactive amount for the full 12 years, but they wanted to pay half. They wanted to pay for 6 years. So the question we have is, how much is Greenville obligated to pay? And the answers are A, Greenville should pay for all 12 years. B, Greenville should pay for only the 6 years they're asking. Greenville should pay prospectively only. Or D, Sleepyville should pay the entire benefit now.
Okay, get your votes in. I'm going to close it off in about 5 seconds.
Okay, and it looks like answer A is the clear-cut favorite here. And in this case, yes, the answer is A. Greenville should pay for all 12 years of retirement. This scenario was similar to the case Mass Teachers Retirement Board versus the Waltham Retirement Board, CR-18-0307. And in this case, DALA had determined that Greenville is obligated to pay for all of the years of retirement. There is no statute of limitations for a contract under Section 38C, so that they would be on the hook for all 12 years that Susan Smith had been retired. So now with that, I will open the floor up to questions if there are any.
Yes, we have a few, John. So the first question we received came early on in your presentation. Does 42B.5 allow for membership into a retirement system or only to purchase creditable service?
All Section 42B does is it waives the requirement in Section 42B that a permanent intermittent or call firefighter become a permanent member of the retirement system. So it's not granting membership to anybody, and it's not granting creditable service. The section itself is not granting creditable service. It's just waiving the requirement of 42B that a person become a permanent member of the fire department where the call time was served.
Okay.
I hope that answers the question.
Okay, thank you. Next question, is 42B.5 listed as one of the local options under the PERAC local board options?
I don't know. That would be a question for the communications department. I don't believe it is.
I can take a look in a second and
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, I do not know. Does
Yeah, I
42B and
don't
a
believe
half
it is, but
I don't think
I'm
so
sorry, go
either.
ahead.
I'll double check. Does 42B1/2 have a 5K limit as of July 1, 2009?
If Judith is listening, she can listen to my response. Um, but again, service can be granted under Section 42B if the person after July 1st, 2009 was in a position that paid more than 5,000 annually. If the service was performed prior to July 1st, 2009, then the 5,000 rule is not into play there. So again, 42B is not granting service or anything. It's just waiving the requirement that a firefighter become a permanent member of that fire department. But under 42B, and Judith, correct me, the service
Yep.
can be granted after July 1st, 2009 if the pay received was more than $5,000.
So, hello, everyone. I'm glad to, well, I'm taking it for granted you're all here. I do start on slide 38, I guess, or something, my slide 38. And I have on here to mention that as a result of the Gomes case, you cannot have this kind of 42B service if you didn't receive $5,000 after July 1st, 2009. So that's a big caveat. And I do have an answer about the listing of the 42B1/2 option. It is listed. So I
It
just
is.
want
Yeah, I just
two
looked.
things. So you have to have received $5,000. Forget about the position with regards to 42B, because 42B, in the Gomes case, they said they had to have received it. So different rules as of July 1st, 2009. Pop back off again.
Thank you, Judith.
Thanks,
You're
Judith.
welcome.
And both 42B and 42B1/2 are listed under local options. So we still have quite a few more questions. For scenario 6, doesn't 3.5 require the service to be rendered in the governmental unit by which he or she is currently employed? Or I guess in this case, he.
No, if you could go back to, I don't know what slide it is on yours, and in my book, it's slide 20. Like two more, I think.
Yes. Do we want me to stay
There we go.
on the section 5's?
The
3,
section
5
3.5,
slide?
yeah. So it's like forward one. Okay, so we see the first highlighted passage. It says any member of a retirement system who rendered service in any governmental unit other than that by which he is presently employed. So the condition for section 3.5 is you had to render service in a position other than the governmental unit where you currently work. So the answer to the question is no, 3.5 does not require it be the same governmental unit. That's section 42C requires it be the same governmental unit.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Can Allenville opt to refund the military deductions taken and not accept any liability? And where is that written?
I don't believe Allenville, based on what I read on the Superior Court decision, I didn't read the Crabb decision, but there's no mechanism in Chapter 32 for refunding contributions that were not erroneous. So I don't believe that Allenville can refund the contributions. But the decision is if the member transfers, Crabb had determined that the credited service is not granted under Section 401H until the buyback is complete. So if Allenville doesn't make any mention to accepting any liability, the entire liability would fall to, in this case, Bryantville, the board where the member was working when the military service purchase was completed. Right. Hopefully that answers that question. Right. Do we have any more questions, Natasha?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm over here reading. I'm sorry. I was muted. So let me go back. The next one was related to the last one. It says, so what happens if Bryantville opts not to complete the military payroll deductions? Is that an option for the board?
That I really don't know the answer to. I don't know if Judith knows and Judith wants to hop on and answer. If not,
John,
whoever. Yep.
I'm going to get the veterans expert to give me the answer, and I will provide it.
Okay. Yeah. So if you could just let us know, Natasha, who asked that question, we can reach out to them.
Okay. Next question. Under scenario number 9, answer was second system Ladyville had to accept per section 3.5. What if Ladyville has a supplemental regulation that states their members are eligible for membership and to do buyback for time at a minimum of 20 hours a week? Why should Ladyville have to accept prior board service when their own members are not permitted to do the same buyback?
Again, Judith, if you're listening, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe the answer to this is Section 3.5 requires that the member can purchase the time, and the current retirement system would be liable for the system, and that's in the highlighted passages we had on Section 3.5. So,
John,
yes,
can I jump in with
go right ahead.
my 3.5 versus 4.2C rant? 3.5 says shall, 4.2C says may. 3.5 you buy from the system, a difference, you buy time that you had in a different system. 4.2C, if the board allows, you buy it from the same system, but 3.5 is mandatory, if that's the question. So thank you for letting me jump in.
Yep.
Okay, we still have quite a few more questions. Temporary service is under 4.2C and 3.5. Part-time service is under 4.2C. If the service is, quote, part-time and temporary, end quote, is the current board on the hook for the liability?
Again, the difference between Section 3.5 and 4.2C is where the initial service was performed. Under 3.5, the service has to be performed in a different governmental unit by where the person currently works. And under 4.2C, it's the same. So if you're working in the governmental unit where you perform the part-time service, you can get the service under 4.2C if all the other conditions are met and the board allows for it. If you were working in another system and it's part-time, because it's not listed as one of the requirements under 3.5, I don't believe it can be, but Judith can let us know if there are additional conditions for the service under 3.5, or it's just limited to the provisional part-time or whatever the language was in 3.5.
Yeah.
Go right ahead, Judith. Feel free.
Do you mind if I jump in? We should have, and I think this, John has just been given an excellent presentation on this. It's very all-encompassing. We should have included our Venn diagram, which would probably give away the store in terms of some of these questions. But if you all look back at buyback presentations we've done in the past, invariably, there is a Venn diagram, which Karen McMahon created, which shows the differences and similarities between Section 4.2C and Section 3.5. There's very little overlap, and there's very little time that qualifies under 3.5. Lots more time qualifies under 4.2C. So I can't remember what the initial thing, for example, part-time service is not covered under Section 3.5. So I encourage everybody to avail themselves of the Venn diagram that has been in, it was probably John and I did a buyback presentation in November, I believe. And I believe the the Venn diagram was in there if you want to consult your records. So again, very limited amount of opportunities under 3.5 and more opportunities under 4.2C, depending on the rules of the board.
Thanks, Judith. And when we post this on the website, I'll add the Venn diagram to the
Excellent,
presentation
excellent.
page. Okay, we're going to take 5 more questions right now, and any more questions that come in, we will do them at the end. For the last question about Greenville and Sleepyville, could calculation policy 15-001 apply since the retirement was over 10 years ago?
I'd have to read the specifics of that calculation policy before I can answer. So if Natasha, if we can find out who asked that question, we can answer that later. I
Okay.
just don't remember the specifics of that particular calculation policy.
Okay. Scenario 14 speaks of 12 years retroactive. What about 40 years retroactive after the retiree has passed and the billing is over $100,000?
Again, that might fall under the purview of calculation policy 15-001.
Okay.
So I don't know the answer to that one offhand.
Okay.
Again, we can find out who asked that question.
Now, this
if
was
it's
a
different
different
person.
individual, so maybe we can add this answer to the website.
Okay.
Next question. If someone became a member in July 2012 and later it was determined that they should have been a member prior to April 1, 2012, would they now be considered a member prior to April 2, 2012? They would need to purchase the prior service.
It doesn't seem like it's a liability question, but yeah, as long as they purchased the time and they were erroneously excluded and they should have been a member prior to April 2nd, 2012, they should be treated for the purposes of their membership as a pre-4212 member.
Okay. If a member was originally a member of 2 retirement systems, A and B, and the member is reinstated after repaying all retirement allowances with appropriate interest in 2020 to System B, is there a 3.8C liability on the part of Retirement System A to Retirement System B?
Okay, so there's a couple of possible questions going on here. Was the person a dual member in A and B when they retired? Were they just a member of A and they're coming back to System B? The short answer is yes. There should be a 3.8C liability to System A if the person is reinstated. I'm assuming under Section 105. I believe that's the question. There should be a 3.8C liability to System A for the amount of time that the member worked in System A. If the person is reinstated to System B and doesn't complete the 5 years of reinstatement service, then there's no new retirement allowance from System B. It would revert back to the retirement allowance from System A. So in that case, no, there would be no 3.8C because System A is still paying the benefit. So if whoever asked that question, if you want to forward me the specifics of the case in an email, I can answer that question.
Okay, and we'll take one more question and then move on, but we still have other questions that are coming in. So if a board has a supplemental that only allows 2 payments on a buyback or makeup and doesn't allow for payroll deductions, then the current board cannot accept the military purchase. I don't know if that was a question or a statement.
Well, we'll count that as a statement. Let's go on to the one last question.
No, that was it. Oh, we can do one more then. Let's see. If a person was erroneously admitted if a person was erroneously omitted, is the member mandated to purchase that time? If so, where is this written in Chapter 32? I have heard that membership that was erroneous is not mandatory.
No, I don't believe there's a requirement that a person has to pay back the time, but they just don't receive the possible membership rights that they may have had when they initially should have become a member. So no, I don't believe there's any requirement that mandates a person who was erroneously excluded from making a payment. And Judith, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
That's right.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
so
any other questions, we'll take them following Judith's presentation to make sure we have enough time. Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
Hello, everybody. That was an outstanding presentation by John. It was so full of things and information. This presentation is a little more of an outline, kind of a very brief discussion of the dual membership laws down through the years. If anybody has any questions that we haven't adequately answered, you should email John or I think that's the best way to go. So we're going to talk about dual membership, and I wanted to mention that, like John, please assume that anyone that I am talking about, any town, is a member of Chapter 32. I usually use towns and places from Kentucky, from Appalachia. Many people know that I lived and worked in Appalachia for 7 years in a very rural part of Kentucky. And so all of the things I mentioned are probably from there. For example, my twins were born in Prestonsburg, Kentucky, almost 24 years ago. I can't believe they're almost 24 years old. And I believe somebody in my scenarios also comes from the town of Prestonsburg. So this will be a good way to kind of come down from the highs and lows of the liability presentation and just go over the background and how we got to the dual member law that we're in now. Could I have the next slide, please? So we can see that 3 basic sections of the law down through the years have provided for dual members. This is a short history of the legislative history of dual members under Chapter 32. And next slide, please. So the first enactment was the enactment which provided for a single pension system and created Chapter 32 as we know it. Because dual members were mentioned at the beginning, we can assume that in 1911 and 1913, whenever you all were doing your separate pension systems, that there were already people who had decided to either work in one system or another at the same time. So this particular act inserted Section 37D into the law, and that is where a lot of people still go out as a dual member. Could I have the next slide, please? And here's 37D as currently appearing in our law. Next slide, please. So this is 37D in a nutshell. It's a story of your money and your creditable service traveling with you throughout your career. And in this situation, Susan is a member of A and B simultaneously, leaves A and is transferred to B, and her funds and her service are transferred to B. She retires in due course from System B, and in due course, PERAC will assign its share of the liability to System A. So that is how it traditionally works if you've worked in 2 boards. So Susan will not get creditable service for more than 1 year. And if she worked simultaneously at the same period, she won't be able to get it. So what's in it for her? What's in it for her is combining the salary, the regular compensation, for her 3-year average. I'm not mentioning a 5-year average because as of this slide, Chapter 176 of the Acts of 2011 doesn't exist. But traditionally, Susan could do her, could bring the curtain down on her career. I think that John mentioned this, I don't know, in scenario 11 or something, 13, that the member could bring the curtain down on your career with having 2 jobs in the 3 last years and retiring on a combined salary. Next slide, please. So as it turns out, there was a real big possibility of manipulation in this situation, which subsequent statutory amendments have corrected. But people could theoretically have 2 full-time jobs in the last 3 years of service. I think everybody knows. I decided not to use the guy's name this time because, you know, I don't know why we have to keep mentioning his name, but there was a guy who worked as a police officer in one town full-time for 32 years or 29 years. And then he got another job in another place for 3 years full-time. And he did this by calling in sick a lot to the first job and other machinations. It was not illegal, but it was certainly a problem. It's what the law permitted. So it took that case to get the legislature to think, yes, we need to try to correct this and make sure we can't have that happen again. I mean, obviously, most people, I'm going to make a blanket statement, are incapable of doing 2 full-time jobs. It might, you know, when I was growing up in my neighborhood, there were some of the fathers in the neighborhood had 2 jobs, and they would work as a janitor in the day, and they would work, you know, one guy worked at the zoo at night. I mean, it's just a really tough thing, and it's unusual to have 2 full-time jobs. So what usually happened was somebody would get a part-time job that they could combine the salary in their last years. Next slide, please. So what happened is Chapter 21 of the Acts of 2009 happened, trying to address the situation that I just described, the possibility of manipulation. So this is Section 52E as inserted by Chapter 21 of the Acts of 2009. Next slide, please. So the upshot of this is, if you triggered this, if you were a member, you had to be a member of 2 systems, 2 or more systems, who on or after January 1st, 2010 received regular compensation from 2 or more governmental units concurrently. That was the triggering mechanism. And you can see in this next bullet point that some people were excluded from the application of 52E, which I'll talk to for a minute. So PERAC instructed that transfers under 37D would not be made when 52E was triggered. And PERAC also opined that a member would retire separately from each system with the service attributable to each system. So they didn't have to have 10 years in both systems, they just needed to have 10 years in one. And these teachings of PERAC were upheld later. But some people were excluded from the application of Section 52E. If we could have the next slide. And it says, and provided further that this, and it still says this, by the way, after the 2014 amendment, that this section shall not apply to any member who has vested in 2 or more retirement systems as of January 1st, 2010. Now, originally, this used to be called the grandfather clause, but the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts has said that we can't use the term grandfather clause anymore in court cases. And I just think it's best practice not to use the term in our slideshows anymore either. So I really tried to figure out what I could call it instead of grandfather clause, and this is all I could come up with. So I'm sure that some term will come down and it will be used to substitute for that term. But if you were vested in 2 or more systems as of January 1st, 2010, Section 52E did not apply to you and does not apply to you, and you would still go out under Section 37D. So if 11 years or so ago you were fully vested, it's not going to apply to you. And people evading this section due to this part of the law are going to become few and far between. In section 20, the law changed in 2014, made a more comprehensive way for people to be excluded. But let me just say that we had a case that went all the way up to the appeals court, and the issue was the guy vested in 2 or more systems as of January 1st, 2010. And he had to make buybacks, and he tried to make the argument that, yeah, he could make a buyback and then he would be vested in 2 or more systems. He had some time to make, and he would buy back, I don't know, whatever amount of time he needed, 8 years from Boston, and just to pick a city out of a hat. And the Court of Appeals said, you know, no, it's a snapshot on January 1st, 2010. And if you have 10 years in 2 systems, you're exempt from this. And if you don't, you don't. Next slide, please. So there were problems that arose as a result of this attempt to solve the dual member thing. It did solve a lot of issues, but it created some issues too, which you can see here. One question was, what about service in a position for which the salary was set at less than $5,000 a year? And a big one was the 3rd bullet point there. People would hang on to train the people that were replacing them. And so they would end up working in 2 or more systems concurrently for a short period of time and then trigger 5.2e. So they had to address these issues. But before we go on to how it was addressed, we had a case, Wesolowski versus Hamden Regional Retirement Board and PERAC. And this was a case that tested PERAC's original teaching about this section of the statute. And Mr. Wesolowski was an elected official for the town of Wilbraham and a member of Hamden County. And he also taught at Westfield State College, so he's a member of the State Board of Retirement. And he made under $5,000 as the elected official. So PERAC said that the under $5,000 rule still applied for him, and no transfer of funds should take place because 5.2e had been tripped. And Dowler and Crabb basically said no transfer of funds under 3.7d should take place when the dual member provision of 5.2e is triggered. The service of a person making under $5,000 a year triggers the dual member provisions. And a person subject to the dual member provisions of 5.2e may retire from the 2nd retirement system with less than 10 years of service, as long as they have at least 10 years of service in one retirement system. So this unfortunate man didn't have 10 years of service in either system. And his case was decided just before the amendments of 2014. Next slide, please. So here is 5.2e as now appearing, and the red language is the amendments. And you can see that the up here by itself for greater than 60 days takes care of the people who are helping with the transition and may coincidentally get caught up in this. And then next slide, please. So overlapping periods are taken care of. The member shall not be considered a dual member if one of the positions is set at less than $6,000 a year. No applicability to Section 6. It says explicitly exclude Section 3.7d transfer from occurring. I think a better way, I should have said that on the slide, is paragraph D of subdivision 7 of Section 3 shall not apply if this paragraph applies, because certainly PERAC's current instruction is that we need to keep making the transfer throughout the people's career, and certainly a big one that excludes a lot of people or applies to only the 5 years of credible service immediately preceding retirement. Next slide, please. So you're either going to go out under 3.7d or 5.2e. One or the other will apply. If Section 5.2e applies, then you have to retire separately from 2 different systems. Next slide, please. And this slide is a nice summary of what happens if 5.2E applies. As I mentioned, calculated as if retiring solely from each system. Each system pays the allowance attributable to service. You have to retire simultaneously. You have to choose the same option. Only required 10 years in one system. Forget about the minimum allowance requirements of Section 13. They're not applicable to the lesser amount. And for post-retirement earnings, both the salaries and pensions should be used. So now we're going to move on to my quizzes. I'm very embarrassed because I only have 3 quizzes and John had like 36 or 37 quizzes, but I could only come up with 3. So I'm going to go through the scenario and the answers, and then you will get to vote. And I found it very annoying that I couldn't for all the quizzes. Okay, so Peter has been an elected official in Quabbin since January 4th, 2010. He became an inspector of weights in Prestonsburg on July 14th, 2015. He has worked continuously at both jobs since those dates. He comes into the Prestonsburg Retirement Board office, loudly demanding to retire with his 3 highest years. So Peter, working as an elected official since 2010, inspector of weights in Prestonsburg since 2015. So there are 4 choices here. A, Peter can't retire because he doesn't have 10 years in Prestonsburg. B, he can retire because he has 10 years in Quabbin, but he must use a 5-year average because his start date is after April 2nd, 2012. C, he can retire, but he must retire from Quabbin and Prestonsburg simultaneously using a 3-year average in Quabbin and a 5-year average in Prestonsburg. D, he can retire, but he must retire from Quabbin and Prestonsburg simultaneously using a 3-year average. So what does everybody think the answer is? Ooh. I hope everybody maintains the gist of the questions. I guess I went on too much. Sorry.
That's okay. Hopefully they were thinking of their answers before we launched the quiz.
I have it on a piece of paper here, so I'm good.
Okay, I'm going to give you guys about 10 more seconds. A little slower this time. It's been a while since we did a quiz. Or maybe folks aren't sure. Judith, maybe you stumped the crowd. All right, 5 seconds.
Okay. That's interesting. Okay, so to go through each question, A is he can't retire because he doesn't have 10 years in Prestonsburg. That's not correct because he has 10 years in Quabbin. So he's eligible to retire under PERAC guidance and under Daller, Crabb, and the Court of Appeals, which we'll talk about in the quiz. You only have to have 10 years in one of the systems. So he can retire in Prestonsburg. I don't think he's going to be enchanted with the allowance he's going to get. B, he can retire because he has 10 years in Quabbin, but must use a 5-year average. That's also not correct because we go by the date of your continuous membership in the system, which is in this case January 4th, 2010. So it's before April the 2nd, 2012. So it's a 3, he doesn't have to use a 5-year average. C, he can retire, but he must retire from Quabbin and Prestonsburg simultaneously using a 3-year average in Quabbin and a 5-year average in Prestonsburg. No, for the reasons I just stated, the allowance, we're trying to make the allowance as if he's retiring, from 2 places. We're trying to make him similar, and there's no reason for him to use a 5-year average with a membership date of, January 4th, 2010. D is correct. He can retire, but must retire from Quabbin and Prestonsburg simultaneously using a 3-year average. And all 3 of my quiz questions are based on opinion letters we have written. So that's an interesting It's an interesting question. So we're ready to go to quiz number 2. This is ripped from the headlines, and this made it all the way to the Court of Appeals, although I have substantially changed the facts and circumstances. I couldn't get all of Petunia's background on here, but let me just say Petunia has a spotty work history, but all told has about 25 years of service with the Paintsville Housing Authority as a landscaper. In September of 2010, she begins work at the Magoffin County Housing Authority, also as a landscaper, during one of the periods of time when she is not working for the PHA. After being fired from Magoffin, she sues the MCHA for wrongful termination. She wins and is awarded 2 years of back pay to make her whole. She's awarded 2 years of salary, and she has to deposit into the Magoffin system the contribution she would have made and be entitled to all the credit. So she wins, is entitled to 2 years of back pay. Meanwhile, she took a job at the Paintsville Housing Authority again, and she was awarded 2 years in one place, and she was working the same 2 years in the other place. So she comes in and she wants to retire, and she wants to retire under 3.7D. So Petunia seeks to retire from the Paintsville Housing Authority, combining her 2 years of service from the Magoffin County Housing Authority under 3.7D for her highest, one of her high year averages, one of her 2 high year averages. Can she do it? So this is a person who got a court-ordered judgment giving them regular compensation and creditable service. The answers are, yes, she can do it since she didn't work for PHA and the MCHA concurrently. B, yes, because damages are not synonymous with regular compensation. C, no, she must retire separately from each as she received regular compensation concurrently after January 1st, 2010, and none of the statutory exemptions are present here. D, yes, since she is allowed to combine her 3 highest years of service. That was the spirit of the court order. So what does everybody think about this?
Okay, and think about your answers. I'm about to launch the poll, and the full answers will not be in these polls.
This is a good summary, though.
And I'm going to give about 35 seconds total for this poll. This should give you plenty of time to submit your response. Thank you.
That's interesting. So the first possible answer, yes, since she didn't work for the PHA and the MCHA concurrently. She kind of did because the court order made her whole for the 2 years with one system. The second, question B, damages aren't synonymous with regular compensation. Sometimes that's true. I don't think she was awarded damages in this case. She was made whole. It wasn't like she was given damages for pain and suffering or punitive damages. The court order said, look, you should not have fired this woman. So she's going to get 2 years of service. She's going to get 2 years of her salary, and she's going to deposit the money into the retirement system. So that is regular compensation in that case. I'm going to jump down to D. Yes, she's allowed to combine her 3 highest years of service. The answer is actually no. She must retire separately from each. This is a Court of Appeals case I was mentioning earlier about the guy who said it was a guy, and I'll tell you the differences between Petunia and this guy, but he said he should have been able to buy back time and recreate the past, go back in a time tunnel and have 10 years as of January 1st, 2010. But the court said that he couldn't under 3.7D and he had to retire separately because Section 52E had been triggered. Member in both systems, received regular compensation at the same time. Now, the reason I'm not giving the citation on this one, we just confuse matters a lot. This actually involved a teacher, and it involved Retirement Plus and TARP, which is the Boston version of Retirement Plus, and I can never remember what it stands for. It's something like Teachers Augmented Retirement Plan or something. But so we had to establish a new calculation policy about what happens when people on TARP and Retirement Plus are dual members. So this added a layer of a big mess to this one, but bottom line, received regular compensation, member after the date has to go out under 52E. And of course, it was although it didn't matter for him, it was the last 5 years. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is my last quiz. Again, apologies for only having 3 quiz questions. And there's a typo in this. You know, we go over these things 120 times, and many people go over it and still, you know, being human beings. So answer A, I realized today should be 2010, not 2020. So sorry about that. But anyway, this is a person who's a member of 2 systems, the Martin and Pikeville retirement systems. And of course, needless to say, Martin doesn't know she's a member of Pikeville, and Pikeville doesn't know she's a member of Martin. So she had been a member of both systems concurrently since February 1st, 2017, when she started working in Martin, and February 12th, 2010, when she started working in Pikeville. So she was injured and retired for ADR from Martin in late 2020, and then tried to get a superannuation in Pikeville. So basically, Hortense slips and falls on the job and retires for ADR from Martin in late 2020. Although she never returned to work at Pikeville after her injury, she now wants to retire for superannuation from Pikeville. Is this acceptable? A, yes, because she received regular compensations from both systems on or after January 1st, 2010. B, yes, she must be retired separately from each system. It doesn't matter if she goes out for 2 different kinds of retirement. C, no, because Section 52E only applies to superannuation retirements. D, no, because if you're going to retire separately from 2 systems, you have to do it on the same day. So what do you think?
Okay. Participants, think about your answer, and I will launch the poll, and you will have approximately 30 seconds.
Okay, so this is good. You know, I didn't mean to do this, but C and D could be right now that I look at the poll questions, and I apologize for this. So A, yes, because she received regular compensation from both systems on or after January 1st, 2010. That is true, but 52E still doesn't apply to her. B, she must be retired separately from each system. It doesn't matter if she goes up for 2 different kinds of retirement. That's not true. It does matter. So the correct answer, as originally envisioned by me, is no, because 52E applies only to superannuation. And that is true. But D, no, to retire separately, you have to do it on the same day. That is also correct. So there are 2 correct answers. I didn't mean to do that, but I think that the basic premise is, first of all, this doesn't have any applicability to any, 52E doesn't have any applicability to anything other than superannuation retirements. And members need to communicate with their boards, whether they're members of two different boards. That's all over the forms. You know, you join, have you ever worked for another board? Everybody, you know, so they need to tell people. So next slide, please. So this is our conclusion slide, which is the most important slide in a presentation. Various books I've read say that if you don't have a conclusion slide, it's like falling off a cliff. You just ends abruptly. So in a conclusion slide, we always say chapter 32 will provide the answer. The facts of each case will dictate what happens, and chapter 32. Thanking you for your attention today. And if there are any more questions, now is the time.
Okay, so we do have a few more questions, not too many, but we do have time for more if people want to stick around. We have about 15 minutes left. Let's see. Slide 52 states that members simultaneously retiring from multiple systems must select the same option. Why? Where in Chapter 32, 52E is that required?
John, do you want to take that one?
I'd prefer not to, Judith.
Come on.
A retirement under Section 52E has been interpreted to be one retirement allowance payable from two different sources or multiple sources. So because it is one, because it is the same retirement, the benefits must be paid under the same retirement option, even though the benefits are coming from more than one source. But that's the primary reason why. And no, you won't find that in Chapter 32 anywhere.
Okay, the next question was basically the same thing. Why must the person choose the same option? So I'll go on to the next one. Are there any parameters in Prosper that will trigger if a member retires from one system and then retires from another system? How does PERAC via Prosper ensure 52E or 37D is properly followed?
You know what? I probably don't know enough about Prosper, but I don't think we have every person on Earth in the systems in Prosper at any one time, such that they'd be flagged. John, what do you think?
We would have to check this with the developers of Prosper, but I believe that Social Security number in Prosper is one of the items. So if a record comes in for a person with a Social Security number, I would imagine it would be flagged if another board is trying to enter the same information, but I cannot confirm that. Another situation that may arise is some retirement systems have a waiver, and if there's no 38C as part of the calculation, it does not need to be sent to PERAC. So you could have a situation where the member is retiring and receiving a benefit from two systems. One system does submit it, the other one doesn't. You know, so there's ways we won't be able to catch every situation. You know, but if a board is aware that a member is a dual member and retiring under this provision, you know, if you could let us know, that would be helpful. But we'll make a suggestion, or we'll ask the developers of Prosper if a situation like that would be caught.
Okay, thank you.
Here, we just don't know if it's possible.
Okay, under what section of the law can an elected official not be allowed to purchase elected official time? Is the elected official opted not, maybe that's if the elected official opted not to come into the retirement system?
You know, this is a sore spot with me, but several years ago, I think it was in 2008, and the name of the case escapes me. We always, until that case came out, PERAC always said you could buy back prior elected official time. You could just buy it back. But then there were a series of cases at DALA, and they have really come out, and now it's a firm thing at Dollar and Crab. So it's a firm teaching at PERAC that if an elected official does not choose to join the system and then joins the system at a later date, they are not allowed to buy back that time. And that is the AWAD case, A-W-A-D, the AWAD case. You probably heard my phone ding, and then I remembered the case. It's amazing how that happens. But so they said, if we allow elected officials to buy back time, we're negating the Section 3 mandate that says elected officials have to opt into the system within 90 days. So it's too bad. I wish it were otherwise, but it is not.
Okay, are there any cases before DALA challenging dual membership in any capacity?
I'm not aware of any right now, at least not involving PERAC.
Can a dual member get a termination allowance? Are the salaries combined?
This doesn't have anything to do with Section 10. So 5.2E wouldn't have anything to do with Section 10. John, do you want to?
I agree, Judith.
Yeah.
The termination allowance is provided in Section 10, not Section 5.
Yeah.
Okay. For dual membership and one system ends their portion of the service, transferring to second system, should first board automatically accept 50% liability for dual membership on the transfer? Or do you accept 100% service and let PERAC assign the 50% 38C liability when the employee retires from second system? Hold on. I don't like the latter because documentation at first system could be misinterpreted by staff later on. 100%, but should be 50%. All right.
The board should accept all liability as if the work was only done in that board. When a person goes to retire, if there's service in multiple systems for the same period at that time, we will adjust for it when determining the portion to be attributed to each system for 38C purposes. But the board itself should not be accepting, in this example, 50% of the time for the time worked. The reason being is there could be a situation where the person continued to work in the second board and was able to take a refund of those deductions, further down the road. If the person became a dual member again, there's a section of the law which I don't know offhand. One of the lawyers can help me out here, but it says a member upon termination of service in one system can withdraw the money if it's the system they contributed the lesser amount to. So, if system A says we're only going to accept half the time while we were dual with system B, but then the person takes a refund of their contributions from system B, now the member's not going to get credit for all the time. So a retirement board should accept the liability as though the service were earned only in that system, and it should be adjusted accordingly when the member goes to retire.
Okay, thank you. Whose regs are used if prorating time bought under 3.5, place worked or placed with the liability?
Judith, you want that one?
Can this person please email me, because I've got to check something out.
Okay, I'll move on to the next
one. It will be the one you're buying the time from.
In scenario 7, reserve police, why is liability not with the place worked?
The liability is not with the place worked in scenario 7. In the reason being is under 4.2b, the member is entitled to the time, and the person was never a member of the first town, the person became a member in the second town, and under 4.2b, upon becoming a member, you're entitled to the service where you worked as a reserve police officer. So the reason why in that example, the second town was liable for the service is because that service was provided for in section 4.2b as opposed to 4.2b and a half. So the reason is the member is entitled to the service under 4.2b, and the only place the person was a member was in Fancy Gap in that example. That's why they were be on the hook for that time.
I love your town names. All right, we have one final question. Is the liability for 3.8c always 50-50, or does PARAC assign a different proportionate share?
No, it's not always 50-50. If you have a person who worked in 3 systems at the same time, it would be 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. If a person works part-time in one system and full-time in another system, that can also be taken into account. So it's not always 50-50 for 3.8c purposes when a person works in 2 systems or multiple systems.
Okay, thank you. Well, that concludes the Q&A portion. Again, there were a couple of questions that we were not able to answer, but we'll try to get responses to the individuals who posed the questions directly. And we'll also add some of these to the website, including that Venn diagram that was mentioned earlier. So Judith and John, thank you for a very informative presentation. Attendees, thank you so much for staying engaged throughout the 2 hours that we were presenting. Judith and John thought we were only going to go an hour. And look at that. So we appreciate your participation today. Again, this is being recorded. It will be posted to the website. I would give us some time. We're working on our annual report right now, so we probably won't be able to post this until early July, but it will be posted to the website. And when it is posted, any board members who were unable to attend live can watch the recording and earn credits. And that is all for today. We're going to leave you with an extra 5 minutes to your day. So enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Judith and John. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.